is online. I know you have many other choices for tonight, and to devote an hour or even a half hour or even 15 minutes of your time tonight, I so greatly appreciate. I want to thank Michael Spencer for all of his time and efforts on our behalf. He did dry run with me. He made me feel comfortable. He was on early with me today. And he devotes so much time and energy to this cause. And we are so lucky to have him and his expertise and to have the National Bar Alliance. It's really an honor to be asked to do this. It's not truly a lecture. I want you to feel comfortable asking questions. And then when I do play the documentary portion, I'm going to ask you to type your questions in the chat so that we just don't talk over the fabulous barn owners who are telling their story. And then at the end, when I end the screening, we'll address the questions in the chat and we'll hopefully have everything answered for you. I want to say that I really loved signing on August 28th for Taylor Barnhill's presentation about the Appalachian barns. I'm excited about the October 16th one coming up with Travis about farms and architecture in North Dakota. I think it's so easy, even if you love barns and these structures, to get siloed right into the kinds of barns that are right maybe in your neighborhood or in your state. And I have a particular passion for Wells barns, which I'll be talking about tonight, but I do not know everything about Wells barns. And I do not know everything about every other kind of barn. So I think being able to hear from people who have similar passions and have different levels of expertise with different structures, that's really powerful for me. And I really enjoy it. And thank you for making me feel like I'm not alone in the level of barn love that I possess and share. And that hopefully maybe we can share a little bit of that today. So again, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got into loving Wells barns, and then we'll go a little bit through JT Wells and his sons and a little bit of their history, and then we'll kind of go into the screening portion and then the questions at the end. But I always have a disclaimer. I always start, no matter if I'm talking in person or online, about Wells barns. I have only loved these barns since 2015. And there are people who have loved these barns their entire lives. And I grew up not knowing about them. I came to them late, and I was very fortunate to speak with Wells descendants, people who have lived around these barns, who have owned these barns, who have loved them much longer than I have, and who know much more than I do. And I am grateful for that. So I am not the be all and end all expert. I do not want to claim to be. I just have a great passion, and this passion is shared by others that have kindly shared their information and their time with me. So it's been a real gift. Um, like I said, I was interested in 2015. My husband and I got engaged, and I wanted to have a barn reception. And I was looking online at some of the barns close to Rochester, New York, where we live, and I came across the website for the Avon Century Barn. And the photographs on the website simply blew me away. The first time I'd seen a photograph of a Wells barn, and I was determined to have our reception there, but they were booked a year and a half out, and I had waited my whole life to find my husband, and I wasn't going to wait another year and a half to have my reception there. And we chose to go to a different non-Wells barn that was beautiful and perfect and wonderful for what we needed for our family. But I always had that interest in that Avon Century barn. And lo and behold, my wonderful sister-in-law had a connection to that barn. Her daughter's first grade teacher was the owner of the Avon Century Barn. And knowing how much I loved it, my sister-in-law arranged for an opportunity for me to shadow Sandy Howlett, the barn's owner. At one point in my life, I thought that I wanted to run a wedding barn venue. And this was an opportunity for me to shadow Sandy Howlett. And instead of shadowing Sandy, she offered me the chance to work there during the summer of 2015. And I jumped at it. So I worked with Sandy for that summer. And when I was there on site helping people with the weddings and the events, people would ask me questions about the barn. And I could not answer any of the questions. And having a teaching background and being an educator, it was really frustrating to me to not be able to answer questions about these barns. And so that's when I did the deep dive of research into trying to find out about the builder of the wedding barn that I was in love with. And there were not a lot of online resources at that time. So I visited the local library, the Scottsville Free Library, when I found that there was a book written by a descendant, Bob Pratt. And I went to the library, and literally the book was on the shelf, and it was the barns that were still standing. and I can't even remember the date and the title, I'm sorry, but I took that book and it had all of the barns that were still standing. I looked at the addresses and then I learned where they were. And then I reached out to the barn owners and it really started organically. I worked with Barb Chapman, the town of Wheatland historian, who you will see in the documentary. And Barb and I worked with Dick Thomas, an incredible local photographer, to document the barns that were still standing. And then Jill Cookman, my producing partner on the documentary, was our fourth member of the Wells Barn Legacy team. And Dick, Barb, Jill, and I, for several years, did in-person presentations to raise awareness of the Wells Barns. We presented at regional conferences, local conferences, state level conferences. We tried to get the spotlight on the barns whenever we could because we were fearful of losing more of them from the local landscape. And I think our first real break in getting some real eyeballs on our barns were we had the chance to work with the Preservation League of New York State. The Wells Barns were one of the seven to save properties on their seven to save list back 2018, 2019. And we were able to have all of the remaining barns that we knew of in New York State be under that umbrella of the seven to save. And we worked with the Preservation League to raise awareness about them, got to have a couple press conferences, and then kept doing presentations in person until COVID hit. And once COVID hit, that's when our in-person presentations pretty much dried up. And Jill and I then focused on the documentary and furthering that. So you'll see some of that. I'll get to the documentary in a minute, but I want to help you understand a little bit more about the builder and a little bit more about the structure of the barns before you see the portion of the documentary that I've got for you tonight. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to pull up just a brief PowerPoint to kind of walk you through a little bit about the builder and the structure of the barns. And then we'll kind of go into the screening from there. Before I do that, does anybody have just some initial questions before I get going?
Nothing in the comments there, Katie.
All right, let me pull up the chat. Okay.
That doesn't seem to be anything, so I think
Oh, I
we're
don't see anything. Okay. All right. So I'm going to let that back. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. And I'm going to pull up that PowerPoint. Can you all see a very austere, handsome looking John Tuckett Wells on your screen?
looks good.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go talk a little bit about the man and the family, and then we're going to go into the structure of the barns. So John Talcott was born in 1843, and he was the son of Moses and Myra Goodhue Wells. And Moses himself was an early pioneer to Wheatland, New York, and he was a master carpenter. So having a master carpenter as a father definitely helped JT in his early days and in his early career. We do know, with Barb Chapman's help, that John Talcott Wells's education ended at the eighth grade. So he did not go beyond eighth grade, yet he was capable of these incredible structures, which continue to delight and amaze people today, which I think is a real testament to his probably his upbringing, the fact that his father was a carpenter. He may have been involved closely with learning while he was young and quite likely hands-on. But his formal education ended at the eighth grade. And this is a picture of the Wells homestead. It is still standing. There's a historical marker in front of it that you will see in the documentary if you watch the whole thing. And if you look at the windows on the house, above the windows are this kind of a molding. And this molding has been used in a lot of the later Wells barns over the windows. And so in our neck of the woods, this shape of the molding is sometimes referred to as the lazy W, right? So like the sides are not up, they're more kind of laying down, but it's like a lazy W. And if you see those on the Wells barns, people say that lazy W stands for the W in Wells. But again, this is a molding that has been seen, throughout time in different structures. So it's not just completely synonymous to the Wells barns or the Wells houses or the Wells structures, but locally we do call those the lazy W moldings above the windows. So you will see those on some of the houses that Wells and his family built and on some of the barns that Wells and his family built as well. The first project that JT did was one of the school buildings in Garbett, the Garbett District Number 3 Schoolhouse, and he built this in 1870. So unfortunately, this one is no longer standing. But Barb Chapman likes to call this the prettiest schoolhouse in Wheatland. And I would have to agree. I think it's stunning. But he did not start with Barnes. His first formal project was this schoolhouse. And then JT married Serena Clark from Schoharie County, New York in 1873. He was around 30 years old. And they settled in the village of Scottsville, New York, which is very close to the hamlet where he grew up, which is kind of the epicenter of the barns that we'll be talking about in a little bit. And together, Talcott and Serena had five sons, and all of these five sons went into the building business at one point or another in their lives. Some of them stayed longer, some of them then moved out and did other things, but they were involved from the early stages. And before he became known for his barns, he created several kind of auditorium structures. And this one previously stood close to Silver Lake in Perry, New York. And the section of the documentary I'm going to show you, one of the barns was moved from Wheatland to Perry. And I think it's kind of neat that there was kind of this history with this auditorium structure in Perry near Silver Lake, and one of the barns has been moved to that location. So this kind of auditorium structure had a rounded arch, and that arch was adapted to make more of a Gothic arch in the barns that you'll be seeing shortly. So we'll talk a little bit about the truss and how that was adapted from the rounded kind of auditorium structure to the Gothic arches of the barns. So the John Talcott received a patent in 1889 for his truss, the Wells truss for buildings or bridges. And if you can see, the lower portion of the screen features that kind of rounded version of the truss, which would have been in the auditorium I just showed you. Another auditorium on Staten Island at Prohibition Park, which is not there any longer either. And another version of an auditorium was built in Storm Lake, Iowa. And that one sadly is no longer there either. But we know of three auditoriums that his truss was featured in. And he also pitched and made bids for other auditoriums around the United States. Ocean Grove is one area where he had pitched a structure, but again, we can really only prove these three that he had a direct chance to build. But when this design was patented, here's some of the language from the truss, but long story short, he used a series of smaller laminated pieces of wood to form larger kind of solid beams. So that's kind of the structure of that. And we have a local steward here in Rochester who saved many of the Wells drawings and many of the Wells artifacts that we have been lucky to feature in the documentary. Here is an example of a portion of that rounded truss, which is in this collector's basement right now. I think he still has it. And we're thinking maybe this was part of the patent application because it's more rounded, or maybe it was a sample truss that John Talcott Wells could take with him when he was pitching his design as a, something people could see and touch and feel. So here we have one of the archival drawings from that collection, and we're thinking maybe this was kind of a transition from that really rounded arch working towards that Gothic arch, but we cannot connect this drawing to an actual structure. But one of the earliest truss barns still stands in Wheatland. It is featured in a portion of the documentary I don't have time to show tonight, but this barn was built in 1892, and this barn does not have the classic lazy W molding over the windows. You see some changes over time. And this one also had a wood silo that was later patented. But so, in the early days of his construction career, he was still kind of finalizing and figuring things out. And then towards the later end of his barn building, he was very much more solidified in the structure and the design and the elements that have become semi-signature when you recognize them. So that Gothic arch for the barns, you see here in this classic drawing that was, this is I think a replica of a classic blueprint, but you can see that it's more kind of pointed at the apex of the barn. And then the beams that come down, again, are those smaller laminated pieces that are, affixed and glued together and bolted together to make that kind of curved, strong truss coming down. And very often they were below the floor down into the, the sill plates of the barn, and that gave tremendous strength, especially against wind and the elements. And that's the reason why many of these structures are still standing. So when we talk about the laminated trusses, here are some close-up photos taken by Dick Thomas. You can see, right, the individual layers or laminated portions of these beams. And most of the Wells barns that we have been privileged to visit in person have between 5 to 7 of these laminated layers. So, depending on the needs of the barn owner, the position of the barn, the wood that was available, there was some slight variation in the number of the layers, but most that we have seen are roughly between 5 to 7 layers. And they're those again, the ribs or those laminated trusses were made from small cross-section sawn pieces of lumber that were nailed together and bolted, and they tie the outer cords of that truss together. So the fact that the pieces come in and they form around it makes it really, really strong and really solid. So when you think about this type of barn versus a traditional timber framed barn, the Wells Truss, when it was patented, larger barns were in demand. People were wanting more storage. Farmers wanted more stalls for horses and cows and livestock, and more storage spaces for hay and grain. And so the beauty, the basements were great and solid and allowed for sheltering the animals. But the upper levels were where the hay storage or the grain storage would have been as well. And so here's one of our smaller Wells barns still standing in Rush, New York. And you can see the Lazy W molding over the double windows at the end. So this barn does have them. And these have become like pretty recognizable in the area where we are. We have roughly, depending on how you count, I would say we have about 45 of these still standing. And we have records of about 100 that we know were built, 45, 46 that we still have. But there's always that intrigue that there may be more out there that are not known for being Wells barns, but they might be. So a closer look at that Lazy W molding. We've got those double paned windows, and then that molding goes across the top. And they were in the drawings. They're on many of the barns. So again, there's that Lazy W. And some of those earlier barns, like I said, such as this one, which is just up the hill from my house in Pittsford, this one does not have, that Lazy W on the end, and the windows are slightly different. So really definitive identification of these barns has to be made from going inside. And when you go inside, I think this is what drew me to them when I was working at the Avon Century Barn, is that you feel like you're in a cathedral. It feels like a church inside with that Gothic arch. And so sometimes these are referred to as countryside cathedrals. And I know other barns are referred to that as too, but I do know that when I was working and long after the wedding had ended and I was sweeping the floor or cleaning the barn the next day and I was mopping, it did feel like, kind of a really cool experience to be in this big, beautiful, arched building with incredible acoustics, and just the beauty of the structure, I think, draws a lot of people to them. So they're not only beautiful, but they're very functional. And, these trusses were designed to balance inward and outward forces, making them very strong, but also allowing for hay and grain storage. And so in one of these barns, a farmer could drive a hay wagon right inside, and the hay track and the hay could be loaded inside that loose hay. And then the wagon could roll out. So it would increase efficiency. So instead of the hay having to be taken along the ridge and deposited outside the window to the wagons waiting outside, that would take longer. So if a farmer could drive right in, they could drop the hay and then roll right out, it made it faster. So there was this efficiency with loading and unloading. And again, at this time, when the Wells barns were becoming popular, it was less expensive to build them because those big traditional timbers were getting harder and harder to find. And with the construction materials, the laminated layers, and labor readily available, constructing something like a Wells barn would be cheaper than trying to find the long timbers or secure the long timbers of a traditional timber framed barn, which would have come earlier. And the beauty of this is that Wells barns could be made shorter or longer, depending on what the farmer or the client needed. So generally two trusses, but if the farmer needed more space, they could have more. And when I look at this image, I look at that gentleman on the top, right? And he's just bouncing up there. And I know he doesn't have any, wires or harnesses. Um, and that supposedly is John Tuckett Wells Jr. up there with his arms up. And I get nervous every time I see this. But when I look at the structure, I can see the number of trusses needed by this particular client, right? And the way they would create them or build them is they would stack them in the reverse order, and then they would raise them starting at the end and then tie each new set of trusses to the ones that were up before it. And so the last one raised would be the first one that was on the bottom of the pile. So here are the five sons, and all of them were involved in the construction career at one point or another. And the one that stayed in it the longest was John Tuckett Wells Jr. And I love this photo because I'm looking at what the gentleman in the front, how his feet are on these, boards, and he's even got one raised up. But I look at this group, this collection of people, and knowing how hard they work to put up these structures. JT Sr. and his sons used multiple crews like this and others working at the height of the barn boom so that multiple barns could be put up in different areas with different crews, and they kind of streamlined that process. So this is one of the barns built for Walter Cox in Wheatland. It was the last one built by John Tuckett Wells Sr. He retired around 1915, and then his sons took over the building mostly from there. This barn belonged to Florence Field, the town of Wheatland's previous historian before Barb Chapman, and it's one of my favorites. So, something we cover in the documentary is if these barns were so groundbreaking and if they were so strong and if their design was so beautiful and meant not only form and function, how did they become obsolete? Right. And so our town of Wheatland historian goes into the changes in agriculture and the impact that had on not needing, right, those grand gambrel roofed barns for the storage space. And the impact of changing times and how that affected the landscape. So when the barns became obsolete, kind of we think the last traditional one was built in around 1942, right? So the economy slowed during the Depression, farming methods were changed. And then at that point, the remaining Wells brothers who were still in the business turned to building houses and remodeling structures that had already been built. So there is a series of houses that we have documented. They're not as known as the barns, but again, when that obsolescence for the grand barns kind of hit and was in the mix, the Wells family had to adapt and changed some of their construction jobs. But despite the obsolescence, a big portion of the documentary, I would say the latter third, goes into some of our local barns that have been adapted and turned into different things and used differently, and not necessarily for farming. Some have been changed into homes. Some of them have been changed into bouldering and climbing gyms here at the Rochester Institute of Technology. And some of them have been turned into wedding venues. So, these barns still have these incredible stewards that are finding ways and struggling to maintain these structures and to give them new relevance and new purpose. And I just really love to show just three that don't have a big piece in the documentary, but that are important. So Erin Bardwell has inherited a barn from her family. And when I first met her, she was struggling to put a new roof on it. She was a single mom. She had this great weight of keeping the structure standing, and she worked hard to put a new roof on one half of the barn at the time. She put the one half up on the worst section, paid that off, and then paid to have the second half done, and then it joined. And I'm just very proud of her. I'm very happy for her. And she says when she goes into the barn, she feels her grandfather's presence. And I am certain that wherever her grandfather is, he's very proud of her efforts, just as I am, in knowing how hard it is to do that. Another barn that you will see at the end of the documentary belongs to a young woman named Lauren Graves. And I'm going to cry right now. Lauren and I cried in her driveway when she gave us permission to fly our drone over it for the documentary. And it was just, I was so impressed because it's so easy when your barn looks perfect or your property is perfect to allow a camera crew to fly over it because you're proud of how it looks. And Lauren, her barn did not match the vision she had for it because she knew how hard it was to take care of it, yet she gave us permission to fly our drones over it. and offered her family's barn as an example that could stand as a testament for the others. And would really make it known to our viewers how hard it is to maintain one of these structures. And so you see, this is one of my Facebook posts about Lauren's accomplishment, but the pictures on the left side are her barn shown in our documentary with the holes in the roof. And she has managed to find the resources to scrimp and save and work hard. And she's put a new roof on. And I cried both times. I cried seeing it with the holes in the roof and feeling so honored that we were trusted to fly our drones over it. And then cried when it was newly roofed and like knowing how hard that was. And I just so impressed with what Lauren was able to do. And it's just a triumph. Right. And I drive past it and I get teary and I'm teary right now. So I'm an emotional soul. And we also locally have a really fun family that has taken over two barns that used to belong to Mr. Neal, and they have brought new life and new breath and new energy and new resources to their barn. And this is just one of their social media posts where they talk about inviting the neighbors in for a gathering in the barn and how her children were involved in getting ready for the event and welcoming the neighbors. And it's just such a central piece of their neighborhood and the family and how they feel really lucky to have that. So we've got some really great things happening, and we just keep trying to draw more attention to the barns here in the area. And we've got some good things going and want to keep some more going. So that's just kind of a little bit of the family and the structure. And if you're okay with it, I would like to show a little bit of the documentary. It's about 20 minutes. And then if you have questions, I want you to put them in the chat, and then Michael and I are going to go through those after, so that we don't talk over the story of the barn owners because they're much better than I am. They're much more engaging and like wonderful. And then we'll answer questions at the end. And if we run out of time, then I'm going to let Michael give out my email and you can ask me anything you want and I will answer you after the fact too. But the portion I'm going to show you here is the family that purchased a barn from California, sight unseen, and decided to move a barn that was in need from Wheatland, New York, which is just where Scottsville is located, where JT pretty much grew up and started his career. And they moved a barn from Wheatland, New York to Perry, New York, which is the location where that auditorium used to be at Silver Lake. So you will hear the story of Jennifer Hall and her family moving the barn. And then it will move into a recap with all of the barn experts and owners at the end. And then we'll kind of cap it at the end of that. All right. Any questions before I go? Michael, do you want to read out any if there are any?
I don't currently see any, so let's go ahead and we'll view and then we'll,
Okay.
we'll field questions at the end.
Okay. So at Michael's advice, I've downloaded this onto my computer. Hopefully there's no stuttering or weird jittery things here, but we'll play it, see how we do, and then we'll go from there. Okay. All right, here goes.
Your once in a lifetime opportunity to own a Wells barn. This rare and beautiful 36 by 80 Wells barn was built in 1923 and is set on over 1 acre of land. Build your dream home on this land or turn this barn into the most unique house in Rochester. Endless possibilities. This is a must see and let your imagination go wild.
It's hard to believe, but a crumbling foundation on Armstrong Road gives testimony to the power of possibility.
It's way bigger than I thought it was going to be. Like, I had no idea what I was getting into. I was very naive to what it all entailed.
I think it's funny because usually if you tell the story more than once, it becomes kind of routine. But in this case, every time I hear Jennifer explain, it just sounds more unreal.
I just saw this barn. I said, oh, wow, this is interesting, a barn. guess what we need? We need a barn. No, we do not. Oh, yes, we do. And I said, what do you think? Should we buy this barn? It just looks so interesting. I don't know anything about anything, but wow, it's so cool. And look at the trusses and how gorgeous they are.
Jennifer and Jerry Hall have arguably the most unique Wells barn. Their barn was constructed in 1923 by George Stewart. Stewart was a contractor and a builder in his own right. He paid the Wells family $25 for the barn's plans and had the help of a Wells crew member on site when the barn was raised. It would be the only traditional Wells barn not built by the Wells family.
The interior beauty of the barn definitely sucked us in. We already had a passion for getting involved somehow in barn restoration in this area. We weren't quite sure how.
Yeah, so then we just crazily bought a barn online without even looking at it and send my little dad to go look at it. And he said, yeah, you got a barn. What are you going to do with it?
You better do something soon.
Because it's about to fall down. It clearly needed a new life.
Jennifer, her brother, and her father, all in construction, shared ideas about giving the Wells barn a new home. That home would be in Perry, not far from the site where J.T. Wells had previously constructed the auditorium at Silver Lake. Relocating the barn from Armstrong Road in Wheatland would not be easy.
But we're a family of loving big challenges. So my dad was on board with turning swampland into buildable lots. It just kind of evolved from there. Taking down and reassembling a Wells barn is not for everyone. It's hard. We have answered a couple questions on is it feasible and what we do, and usually we tell people what we've spent, and that could kind of scare people away, but it's a big deal. And to do it right, you have to really put forth your best effort. I think that that's what you need to do if you want to take it down and do it.
It's really about getting the right team around you. We fell into it. We were just blessed. But it's that team that can help you put together not only the plans you'll need to get through the county, but to get past the emotional side of it to the practical side of it. Then the business side can come from that and grow. Getting together with our pastor and praying about it was a very big part of what's continued to lead us through this.
He connected us to Ben and Jerry, the Amish. So that was the big connector because no one else wanted to really talk to us about deconstructing a 100-year-old barn. No way. And we know a lot of construction people. We're a family of construction people, and no one wanted to touch it. So I think Jeff, our pastor's connection to Ben and Jerry was huge for us.
They had built a gymnasium for his church in Perry, and he just spoke again to their integrity and their knowledge and their quiet fortitude.
And they're young. They're young guys.
And then as we went on with kind of patchworking our project together, engaging an architect who really understood our passion as well as the vision of what we wanted to accomplish. And then Jen's dad is a builder, and he came on board and put together all the tradesmen to round out the team. We just had a novice idea of what it might be, but all of the parts of tearing it down piece by piece, meticulously labeling every piece so they could actually reconstruct it in its genuine and original design, really is the credit of the Amish team that did it for us.
They really did take a risk. They took a huge risk. to take down one of these barns. For us to trust them was easy because they just really took the time to think it out. It wasn't a yes, we're going to take this project on. I need to think about it and I need to talk about it. And we didn't hear from them for months.
But when we did talk to him again, he said, "Oh yeah, we want to do it." And that was all there was to it. It was basically a handshake deal, and we were off and running. We were on the West Coast. We were watching it through the lens of a camera. And it was fascinating and very emotional to see how they would strip it apart just piece by piece and meticulously label every piece. It was fascinating to see how they would identify every particular piece by number. That engineering and fine tuning literally that allowed for a very smooth rebuilding.
The backdrop to the news site is a forever farming farm with corn. So it looked very similar to where it was on Armstrong Road in a very rural setting. It went back to a rural community where farming's very prevalent and present.
I never really expected the people to get so excited during its raising. How they were kind of saddened when it had skin put around it because they could no longer enjoy the arches. And I just kept telling, well, soon you'll be able to come in. We're going to have community events. I think the community was surprised that we had such a calling to include the community in the project and not just to drive it as a new business venture. We didn't really promote the first event. It was just an open house. The community had seen it going up from its roots and be reborn.
You'd see everybody walk in the front door and then they would just like, they would look up and it was almost like this eerie silence too. It was crowded, not too crowded, but everybody just would come in and they would stop talking and then they would just stare up and it was fun.
Yeah, and they wanted to hear about the Wells story. Every one of them wanted to hear who designed this, how did this happen, where did this come from?
I think the roots for Jerry were amazing. I needed the roots too, though, because I was gone for 20 years. So no one even knew who I was, really. I mean, I had a different married name. And so I kind of got my roots back along with you planting roots too. It was kind of fun.
Mhm.
We go there almost every day with the kids.
They're seeing what heritage means, not just with their local family and their grandparents and establishing and deepening those roots. And they understood that was a big part of what brought us back to New York. But now with the community, I think that they're old enough to really get the idea of what a barn represents to our community and what a barn represents to the farming history.
It keeps growing. It keeps growing. So we did get another barn. A beautiful family that I just really fell in love with. Their barn was falling down. And so we ended up having the privilege of actually taking their barn down along with the help of Ben and Jerry. It had really incurred a lot of damage to it. It wouldn't have lasted through the winter. And Ben and Jerry had transported it to Perry, where it sits now. We created a whole nother exterior shell to save the trusses from the inside, which made everybody happy. And our building department in our county was incredible.
I think the most helpful thing there was the county had an appreciation for the historical significance of the structure itself. So they really worked with us in terms of the balance between the open air concept of the pavilion while protecting the interior, the structural integrity of the facility at the same time. So I think the first barn, making them so much more aware of how the trusses worked together and were so interrelated, gave them a better perspective of how to accomplish what we needed to do for the pavilion.
And the Krenzer family was really sweet. They knew it was going to fall down or come down. They had to take it down. There was no other option. So it's kind of that balance. Like we get sad that it leaves Scottsville and we get sad that it leaves the area where Mr. Wells put it up too. It's not like we're trying to steal trusses and take them to Perry like we're the big bad wolf or something, but we're just trying to, if it is going to fall down, and it's not much like Armstrong Road, they weren't going to take that barn to the next level. And that's the beauty of letting somebody have it. Even though they move it to a new community and a new location, it becomes a new life.
I guess it's an observation that all of these barns have one very solid thing in common is that they're experiential. They're needing to have a relationship with people inside of it. And that's really what the barns were built for in the first place. I mean, they were always built utilitarian, to have a purpose, to have a function. And so each one of your stories, it's a function. And that really says a lot to me because then you'll see the ones that don't have a function, that don't seem to survive.
When I look at this group collectively, I think, what kinds of resources or what kinds of support would you like to see in New York State or even nationally or even in the communities where your barns are right now? What kinds of supports do you hope to see in place?
When you're a caretaker of a Wells barn, especially over generations, you got three companions. You always have water, wind, and worry. And they'll always be with you. There's always some degree of pressure. Like even when a pipe breaks, there's pressure. It isn't like you got all day just to fix this broken pipe. You're coming home from work. You got a pipe that's got to be fixed. What if it's beyond your ability to do? Then you got to find somebody. It's just constant managing. It makes me feel that there should be a certain specialty psychiatrist for farmers. It would be like so perfect, You go through like any of this stuff and you just dial somebody or sit on one of these couches, and if you could get out and everything was set, man, it'd be worth some money, or at least a couple sheep.
I think you should at least have like a historic registry be able to stamp your barns like they do homes, and then you get tax credit breaks. I know in San Diego, they have a lot of historic homes that they've designated as historic landmarks, and they're allowed to pay no property taxes on those buildings. And I think the same designation, because our history, especially here in the East Coast, is built around these barns. I think that the government should allow that. I think a lot more people would be saving barns if they had a financial incentive, even on taxes and property taxes.
Yep. We see the barn as something, wonderful and special, but we also see so many, at least I see so many vulnerabilities in it. And then you only have so much money. You can be all dreamy and stuff, but money is critical. We had to let one barn go. We had to take down one barn so that the resources could be put into a more important barn, the Wells barn. So those are hard decisions. I've heard in Scotland and Yorkshire, they pay the farmers per head of sheep or for stone walls to keep them up because it's so important for their tourism industry. So if there was some kind of tourism angle and it was supported financially, like the sheep and the stone walls over across the ocean, maybe that would be a useful thing to look at.
We've had a couple barn tours. Historical societies have parties there. I feel very much it needs to be shared because people need to come in and experience it. Really find that to be a common thread in all of these environments that, they're working structures that keep having experiences, that keep it alive and has spirit to it. There's something very living about these environments that need to sustain people coming and going, animals, life, the process of life, the circle of it. The involvement with it, the community piece. I really do see that as their living structures. And when you see one sitting vacant for a long period of time, and it's like the light goes out of it.
In losing our barns, we lose a bit of ourselves. Once lost, the shared history wrapped up in these barns built by J.T. Wells and his sons can't be replaced.
I'll thank all of you for sharing your stories. I'll tell you, I've been part of this person's dream for over 40 years. And, there were times I said, what did I do? Why am I here? It's below zero. I'm chopping ice, trying to get it out. The animals are fed before I eat. I have children to take care of. And is this all really worthwhile? And I have to say, it has been the experience of my life. And I thank you for sharing your stories because all those times chopping that ice was nothing compared to what you. Thank you. Thank all of you.
I think it is an important story that a pretty much normal person can embark on saving a barn or other kind of structures. I really hope that I encourage people. I want that message when they visit to say, you can do this too. Or you're interested in maybe a caboose or an old mill or something. I mean, there's so many structures out there that should be saved. The stories are really important. And we're just shepherds of it for a very specific time.
At the end of the day, I know who built this legacy. I've met passionate individuals and families who shoulder the collective weight of these barns and continue to champion them. But ultimately, with caretakers coming and going, the inevitable cycle of life and death begs the question, what more will it take to secure these sentinels of the past a lasting place in the future? All right. So that's where we end it when we go to the credits. But we wanted to leave the viewer with a question and maybe a call to action to see what they could do to help us keep these barns, keep going. I've talked a lot. Who wants to talk with me?
Okay, I do have a question in the
Sure.
comments. So we do have a question that's asking about the first date of a gambrel barn built by the Wells. So what was the first Wells barn that used a gambrel roof?
Well, we know the patent was patented in 1889. Um, we have the one of the earlier ones still standing, which was Nathan and Hannah Ruckberg's Wells Barn, which is documented from 1892. We do think there were earlier barns that were, like practice barns or maybe not fully Wells Truss, or so I can't pinpoint the exact date of the first gambrel roof built by Wells. I'm sorry, Rudy.
Are there other questions? Folks are welcome to ask as well if they want to take their mics off. That's fine. Unmute yourself, or you can post in the comments. I did have one, Katie. In terms of the barn boom that you talk about, so what dates are you kind of bracketing with that?
I would say probably, gosh, in according to our records, kind of from about say 1910, but through like 1915, 1918 is when a lot of them were built in quick succession. So right around that time frame, it was kind of as Wells was older in his career and as his retiring and his sons were coming on. But that all kind of changed in the later time due to shortage of materials and the depression and the situation going on at that time. So if I had to pinpoint it, it'd be right around there. Barb Chapman might have a more specific chunk of time. She's kind of our resident expert here, but just based on my recollections of some of the records in the time frame. We do have, if I can share my screen for another second, I want to show you that we have a website, and on that website is kind of a timeline. So let me see if I can pull that up, if I can get to it after. Let's see. So we do have a website, very rudimentary. It was a grad school project of mine multiple years ago for library school. And we do have a timeline kind of on here that kind of pulls up, if I can get it to get going here, kind of that 1889, early 1900s, mid 1900s. So you can kind of see when different barns were built and kind of the rough years that we have the records for. So that is on there. We also have barn maps and driving tours. We've encouraged people during COVID to do their own driving tours. We have maps, and if you click on the barn, it will pull up a pin and tell you the history of it. We have a master list at the very bottom of all the barns that we know of that are still standing that people can download and then go find and drive past. Again, those were kind of created during COVID. And we have some educator resources that we did some project-based learning experiences where kids in the local community and Churchville Chili, where we taught about the barns and we had them research and figure out creative ways to repurpose a barn that was in jeopardy. We did that with Churchville Chili students, and then we kind of modified that for a timber frame barn in Penfield a couple of years ago. So we have a bunch of resources on here. We also have a historic Barns of J.T. Wells and Sons Facebook group. This was instrumental in me connecting with a lot of the Wells descendants and barn owners and barn lovers. And as we started to grow our following here, we had enough data and information to show our grant funders that we had interest in this topic for the documentary. We were lucky to have a fiscal sponsorship from the Wheatland Historical Association, which allowed our independent production company to go after a grant from the Rochester Area Community Foundation. We got a $20,000 grant from them, and then that grant allowed us to show leverage for a New York State Council on the Arts grant for 10,000 more. So 30,000 in grant funding, a lot from our own pockets, a lot from family and friends, and we had a few online fundraising efforts, but it's a labor of love and a passion, and our friends and family helped us do it, and two small grants that we had to write and earn and get. So our local television station here, our PBS affiliate WXXI, was our presenting station, and any station in New York, PBS station in New York, has access to our documentary to show it for free. So we have not had any distribution beyond that so far. We really are just a two-woman team, Jill Cookman and myself, and we own the rights to it. So it is our project to share as we choose, and we're happy to share it tonight. So it's been a labor of love. I see some other questions here. Marty, the range of dimensions of the various barns, if you go onto the website, I don't have them memorized, but there are some drawings there that show kind of some dimensions. And the trusses were pretty standard. So if you go on the website and look, you'll see an answer to that. I love it. We have a fifth cousin to JT Wells. Both sides included farmers and teachers. Thank you so much, Sue. It's an honor to have you on here and to be able to have worked with your family and your ancestors. And then I see what was the historic context of farming in the area in the early 20th century there. We've got from Vermont, a similar resurgence in barn building during this period to combat shipments. Sorry, yeah. So Wheatland is kind of the breadbasket, right? We had a lot of grains that were harvested here. We had access to the various canals. We had, the Erie Canal and the Genesee Valley Canal that allowed for transport, and we had railroad lines as well. So a lot of those grains were then transported out and distributed through trains and waterways and things like that. So I don't know if it was a means to reduce bovine tuberculosis transmissions, but that's fascinating. Do we know if Wells ever included dances or similar celebrations than completion with the barns? We do know that his truss was featured in the Scottsville Centennial. It was featured over the parade route in several locations. So the trusses were definitely incorporated. And then they had incorporated that truss over a bicycle path in Scottsville because Scottsville was known for the bicycle craze and people would travel from the city to Scottsville on bikes. And so I do know there was a truss featured over the bike path. There's a barn in Interlake in New York, which is down near Ithaca, that still does barn dances. They just had theirs, I think, last weekend or the weekend before. I dragged my husband to it one year and it was so much fun. This Saturday, the historic Pittsford is having a barn gala in the only hybrid barn that we know that started as a timber frame barn and has a Wells truss built on a timber frame halfway up. And so that is a 60th anniversary gala for historic Pittsford. So they're still being celebrated. I don't have a lot of records of barn dances from when the barns were constructed. I do feel that we were fortunate to have a lot of archival photos that we could then put into the documentary. The first barn in Perry had a good dance. I love it. You've been there. I love it so much. And Janet's asking, does the Wells Truss design appear in other states? So there are rumors and hints that maybe it extended beyond. We have no concrete proof of actual barns constructed outside of New York State with this style of truss. There are other gambrel roofed barns and different plank truss style barns, but as far as the laminated Gothic arch, the Wells Truss specifically, we don't have any records of those. But hints and rumors have suggested maybe it spread. We just can't document that.
Well, Katie, thank you so much. What a wonderful talk, and the movie is absolutely fantastic. So again, thank
Thank
you
you.
for sharing that. I love the emotion associated with it, and I think that just adds another dynamic to barn preservation.
Oh, well, it's definitely, I wear my heart on my sleeve, but barn people are some of the best people I've ever met. Very willing to tell their stories, very friendly, very open. And the Amish team that you saw in the documentary, it took 5 years to earn their trust. And we were very careful not to, reveal their faces or their features and very respectful in working with them. And that was a great honor. And I think when you have a good passion for it, right? I think that conveys. But the project from start to finish took 9 years, inch by inch by inch. And I think if you don't love it, you won't survive 9 years of pushing for it. So everyone who has worked on a barn or owns a barn or loves a barn knows that nothing happens very quickly. And then it takes that continual love to see something through.
And I know some folks are probably going to have questions about some of the initiatives that you've done, which are fantastic. And you mentioned before a way to kind of get in contact with you.
Sure. Yep. There's an email address, wellsbarnhistory@gmail.com. So if you want to send me a message separately, I will monitor that account a little more closely right now and be sure to answer those. So wellsbarnhistory@gmail.com.
And again, yeah, your website and the Facebook, social media too. A lot of nice interaction there as well.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, again, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for coming this go around. Do keep in mind that we have our next lecture on October 16th. So again, that's There's No Place Like Granary: The Speculative Architecture of North Dakota Farms. I'm excited because I know nothing about North Dakota farms, so that will be an interesting one for me. But again, thank you so much, Katie, and yes, excited to have you here tonight.
Thank you for having me. And thank you everybody for coming.